Welcome to Bible Study, Parody, and Subversion in Matthew's Gospel. If you want to hear the full commentary on the Gospel of Matthew, I encourage you to go to episode 1 and start there. This is a special episode. This special episode is on miracles. In this episode, I'm going to talk about a friend I had back in the 1980s. To protect his memory, I will not use his real name nor the name of the town in which we lived. But everything I'm telling you is stuff that actually happened. It really happened. It was, as I recall, January of 1985. I was 19 years old and living in the Deep South, deep in the Bible Belt, in a small town that for the purposes of this episode, I'm going to call Holyoke. I received a message that one of my friends needed help. He had entered a contest to win a car and was allowed to call on friends for assistance. Before I tell you about the contest, let me tell you about my friend. Let's call him Apollonius. Apollonius was what you might call eccentric. He was one of those guys who by our senior year in high school, which is when I met him, had already lived a life of great sin and had repented of it, making a huge turnaround, and had become an outspoken evangelist and youth leader in his church. And I'm not sure if it was part of his repentance or maybe just part of the public witness he wanted to portray or something else, but he would come to school dressed as if he were going to the office, with a dress shirt and slacks and dress shoes, and as time went on, more and more cologne, until it got to the point where you knew he was in the room even if you couldn't see him. One time I commented on his new cologne, the new scent, as soon as he entered the room at the far end of it from me. That's how overwhelming the scent was. And Apollonius liked to sing Christian praise music, and he would do so unexpectedly at different points throughout the day, a little off-key, and often with the added aid of sign language, which I don't think he really knew, and so he was just babbling with his hands. But no one else at our school or in our circle of friends knew sign language either, so he could fake it pretty safely. He was a leader among a group of neo-Pentecostal young people that I'd fallen in with, and he claimed to have a spiritual gift called the gift of knowledge. That meant that he sometimes knew things that he shouldn't be able to know. Sometimes it was the future. Sometimes it was what someone else was thinking. Sometimes it was advice for someone that maybe they didn't want. You know, things he should know. The gift of knowledge. We were all sure that Apollonius would one day be a famous televangelist. I personally detested televangelists, but I trusted Apollonius, so I figured he would at least be an honest one. So that was Apollonius. Now let me tell you about the contest for the car. This car dealership in Holyoke issued a challenge that whoever could keep their hand on the car the longest would win the car. It was a red 1976 Fiat, and it was in the dead of winter, in January. And when I got there, Apollonius was one of 23 people who were holding their hands on the car, waiting for all the others to get tired and give up. It was a competition to see who was the most determined, or the most desperate, or the most insane because they were risking freezing to death in the cold for this 1976 Fiat. Apollonius needed me and others from our circle of friends to bring him food because this was going to take days. Now, every couple of hours, they were allowed a bathroom break. At the same time, all at once, so there would be a mad race for the bathroom, or at least that's what I witnessed. And I think this was the mistake that the dealership made. If they had not allowed bathroom breaks, it would have been a much shorter contest. But after 2 very cold days and nights, there were still 9 people holding out. Fearing that some of these maniacs might never let go, the dealership decided to end it by drawing the winner's name from a hat. And before I tell you how it ended, let me tell you what Apollonius told me when I got there 2 days earlier. Apollonius told me that he had had a dream, that he would get a red car. And when he and his housemate were driving by the dealership, he saw the car and blurted out, "That's the car! That's the car in my dream!" Well, they found out that the car was being given away in this contest, so he entered it. Apollonius told me that when there were still 22 other people in the running, holding their hands on the car. Well, it came down to 9, and so he had a 1 in 9 chance that they would actually draw his name. Of course, he knew that he was going to win because of the dream, and lo and behold, they drew his name. He had known through a dream that he would win the car, the gift of knowledge. Now, we can make fun of it, we can laugh at it, but that's what happened, my friends. He prophesied the future, and he was right. The Gospel of Matthew and the other 3 Gospels in the New Testament are full of miracles, mostly healings, but other miracles as well. And we have to ask, were they real, and can they happen today? During my sojourn among neo-Pentecostal communities in the Deep South in the 1980s, I knew people, I had good friends, who were healed when we prayed for them. Now, it didn't always happen. Usually when we prayed for people, nothing happened. But occasionally, someone would be healed, or at least they would no longer have symptoms, however you might conceptualize it. And I'm talking about things that were normally lifelong or potentially fatal conditions, fairly serious stuff, things that don't naturally just go away. So it wasn't coincidence that the symptoms just happened to disappear soon after we prayed for them. These were the sort of symptoms that would hang around for life or were fatal if left untreated. Now, I know there have been many cases of fraudulent faith healers, but I'm talking about people I knew before and after their healings, close friends whose healings I witnessed. It's hard for me to explain these away. I say all this because in most churches today, especially those not in the neo-Pentecostal communion, we don't expect these sort of miracles. When we read the Gospels in many of our churches, we subtly de-emphasize the miracles, especially the ones that aren't healing miracles, but even the healing miracles are seldom commented on in many of our churches. Also, I commonly see memes and websites that say that Jesus and other people like him in the ancient world who claim to perform miracles were really hucksters, tricking people into thinking that they performed miracles when they really didn't, and they knew it. But I can tell you, whether we believe these miracles happen or can happen or not, there are people who experience them and believe that the miracles actually occur. The healings that I witnessed in the 80s, and the incident of my friend Apollonius winning the red 1976 Fiat, these were situations where everyone involved believed that the healings took place. And even today, looking back, I really can't explain them any other way. So no one has to be lying or trying to trick anyone. Even if we could find some natural explanation for these things that happened, the fact is that everyone at the time really believed that a miracle happened. No one was lying. No one was trying to fool anyone. Now, There were other people in the ancient world who, like Jesus, performed miracles. One of those people was a man named Apollonius. Apollonius of Tyana. He lived in the 1st century and traveled around Asia Minor, which today we call Turkey, and northern Syria. The record that we have of his life has many striking parallels to Jesus, including that a supernatural being visited his mother to let her know that her child would be divine, that he was called the Son of God, that he stood trial for conspiring against the Roman emperor, and that he was given the death penalty and that he ascended to heaven. Now, a lot of those details are thought to be manufactured later and included in the record of his life as a sort of polemic against Christianity. The sources of them come well after the New Testament Gospels, and he is cited by anti-Christian writers as proof that Jesus wasn't special. But even if some of the details of his life were invented to counter the spread of Christianity, it is generally agreed by scholars that he probably was a wandering sage who healed people and cast out demons. Maybe none of that other stuff happened, but he was a wandering sage who healed people and cast out demons, or at least that's how people experienced him, regardless of whether one believes the healings and miracles actually happened. Just as I and my circle of friends back in the 1980s experienced healings and other things that we interpreted as miracles, things that I still can't really explain any other way. Now, some Christians might feel threatened by the story of Apollonius of Tyana. I am not. I'm not threatened because if there was another guy wandering around, healing people and opposing the empire, wonderful. We need all the allies we can get. We need more stories of people like that to inspire more of us to follow their example of healing people and opposing the empire. Now, I don't know if we need to practice more faith healing. To be honest, I tend to feel uncomfortable with that stuff now, even though I witnessed it being done back in the 1980s. But I do believe that we need to heal each other in whatever way we're able to do that, and to oppose systems of domination. Now, in the Gospel of Matthew, the miracles aren't just for the sake of doing miracles. Here's a quick summary of how I've interpreted Jesus' ministry of healing in Matthew in this podcast. Number 1, Jesus' ministry of healing reverses the effects of the empire. The empire caused a lot of food scarcity in its conquered lands, and this resulted in high degrees of disease and disability. Jesus' healings reverse these effects. Number 2, Jesus' healings provide free health care to impoverished people. Most people in the ancient world, in the Mediterranean world, were poor and couldn't afford to pay healers. So Jesus provides free health care for them. Number 3, Jesus' healing constitutes a campaign by which Jesus overcomes his enemies through giving life and loving people rather than taking life or killing people. It's part of the great reversal of the gospel. Conquest through love, not hate. And number 4, at a literary level, the healings are signs of liberation, enacting the texts of liberation from the Hebrew prophets, which paint images of people being healed. In the Hebrew prophets, when they talk about liberation from empire, they paint word images of people being healed, such as the lame leap for joy, the eyes of the blind are open, the ears of the deaf unstopped. These are the word imageries that are painted when talking about liberation from empire, and so Jesus' healing in the Gospels fulfills those texts of liberation. Now, if all that was too fast for you, then I refer you to episode 8B of this podcast entitled, Jesus Begins an International Campaign of Healing. But there aren't just healings. There are other miracles in Matthew, such as walking on the sea or calming the storm on the sea? I've argued in this podcast that the sea, the word sea, the image of the sea, represents the power and domain of the empire, and that Jesus calming the storm on the sea or walking on the sea signifies his power over the empire. Love conquers even the empire. Now, I'm not an expert on the story of Apollonius of Tyana. It seems that his story may go in at least somewhat the same direction. Perhaps one day I'll have the time to be able to study it and find out. But the point that I'm trying to make in this episode, in this podcast about Matthew, is one, that the healings and other miracles have meaning beyond just spectacle or proving something about Jesus. And number two, that they are historically plausible. Whatever you think about Jesus or about miracles, it's completely plausible that he and the people around him fully believed that the miracles were happening. In other words, no one was lying or trying to trick anyone. To be clear, I'm not wandering into historical Jesus studies to make a claim about what actually happened. I'm remaining in my socio-literary lane. I'm just saying that the text fits into its historical context, even in terms of claiming healings and other miracles, and doesn't necessarily signal that anyone was lying. One other thing that I want to note is that when these sorts of things happen in modern times, I think it's worth examining what they mean and how they are interpreted. When televangelists engage in faith healing, it often seems aimed at expanding their fame and fortune. And that's where we tend to hear of hucksterism and fake healings. Among the rank-and-file believers, however, in the Deep South, I never experienced anything like that. In fact, there was almost never an emphasis on a single person as the performer of the healing or miracle. It was almost always a group effort, something the community practiced together. Or as in the case of the red fiat that Apollonius got, something that was done through the person. The dream came to Apollonius. He didn't go looking for a way to get a car. And he was in need of a car. And that's very important. Need is one of the things that we should be considering when interpreting the meaning of miracles. Let me tell you another story about Apollonius. When we were still in high school, Apollonius noticed that most of the clothes that I wore looked like hand-me-downs. They looked like that because that's what they were, and not all from my older brother. My father was a pastor of a small church that didn't pay well, and the people in the church would give us their old clothes as a way to compensate for the low pay that my father got. At least that's the way I interpreted it. I don't know if my parents would have put it that way, or even if my brothers understood it the same way, but that's the way I understood things. And we really needed those clothes, because we couldn't afford to buy much at the store. So I usually wore clothes that came from another family, and they were often out of style. It was the early 80s, and I was wearing wide-collar shirts from the early 70s and all sorts of funky stuff. So I was kicking at 70s in the 80s, but not in a cool, hip sort of way, because the colors, they were 70s colors, but they weren't bright anymore. They were faded. So I was wearing old, faded clothes that were out of style and not quite the right size. They didn't usually fit me well. So Apollonius got it exactly right. But it didn't take a genius. It wasn't the gift of knowledge or anything. It was sort of obvious. And it was love. He cared. That's why he noticed. Apollonius saw my situation and decided to take me shopping to buy me some clothes. He told me that some people in his church had given him the use of their credit cards, so he was using their money, not his own. I never looked at those credit cards, so I don't know whose name was on them. At the time, I didn't think to question that. Here he was with these credit cards saying that someone else had given them to him to use as he saw fit, and I didn't think to question it. And to tell you the truth, I still don't know what to make of it. To tell even more of the truth, I only started questioning the story when I started to write this podcast episode. It took me all this time, but 40 years later, I began to wonder if he might not be telling the truth. I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Looking back on it now, I wonder if I may have benefited from a type of Southern hospitality, for lack of a better way to describe it. In the South, sometimes when someone wants to do something for you or give something to you, they say it's from someone else who wants to remain anonymous. It's a way of preserving your dignity, of removing any sense of awkwardness or power imbalance between the two of you, so that you can remain friends and you don't have to feel indebted to them. You're obviously indebted to someone, but you don't know who, so it doesn't interfere with your friendship. But that's what I think now. Back then, I swallowed his story hook, line, and sinker. Didn't doubt it for 1 minute. Now, if my theory is correct, what makes his act of kindness all the more extraordinary is that he didn't have much money. His family was poor, poorer than mine, in fact. They lived in a trailer park. I'd never been there, but a mutual friend told me that it was not a nice place, and that Apollonius never invited anyone over because he was embarrassed by where they lived. Apollonius told me that the church paid him as a youth minister, which was probably the case, but that probably wasn't much money. It's likely that he took on credit card debt to buy me those clothes. And over the years that he knew me, he never revealed that the clothes were from him. I don't know. Maybe there's another explanation. Maybe he was telling the truth, but that seems unlikely to me now. Also, that's what I remember of him. He always cared about other people, especially low-income people like himself, and he tried to help other people out. And that's what I experienced among the small town and rural neo-Pentecostal and Pentecostal holiness communities. They were simple, low-income folk who were quick to help out their neighbors. And also, while it varied, there was more racial integration in those communities than what I found elsewhere. I had multiple experiences in multiple places in the Deep South of black people and white people, all low income, worshiping together in these Pentecostal communities at a time and in a place, in a region where there was very little racial integration otherwise. So what do these miracles mean? Well, they don't necessarily mean that anyone is lying or trying to trick other people. They often mean that people are trying to take care of each other, that they are trusting in God and each other to provide what the dominant economic and political systems won't provide, and have in fact taken from them. Miracles often mean that people are keeping faith with each other through the Holy Spirit of love and mercy, creating communities of healing and mutual aid that preserve everyone's dignity. However unsophisticated we may think them, belief in miracles is often an act of resistance, love, and solidarity. In times like these, when the powers that be are on a rampage to steal from us, more than ever, we need miracles that are born of this sort of love and solidarity. May we have such faith to do these sorts of things in these desperate times. Thanks for listening. This has been a special episode of Bible Study, Parody and Subversion in Matthew's Gospel.